Well, here we are today, and we're talking to Pastor Wayne Alcorn. Pastor Wayne Alcorn is a pastor of an incredible church in Brisbane. He has been involved working with young people, working with people in the streets, and counseling and working as a pastor for many, many, many years. But he's just released a new book, and it's called My Father's Son. Wayne, what is the story? There's always a story behind a book, and obviously this book contains dozens of great stories, and you can see I've marked quite a few of them here. But what is the story behind this book?
Well, firstly, hello, Warwick, and hello to the folks that have dialed into this moment. Um, Look, the story behind this book is that there is within the heart of every man a need to have the affirmation of their father. And without it, there's always something missing that no one and nothing can fill. And I know that firsthand because, firstly, I'm a human, I'm a man, and I know that from my own experience. But also, there's a story that drives through the whole book, and it's the story of my father, a wonderful human being, my hero called Alex Alcorn, who passed away in October of 2021. I still miss him deeply. And he was the town drunk whose life was a complete mess because of just the dysfunction that was in his life that started as a child. And he wrestled with it all his life to the point when, by the time he was 24, he was suicidal. And his life was a mess until he made one major decision, which we might get to talk about sometime today. And that decision not only changed his life, but it changed the life and the trajectory of our entire family. I say to men especially, but to everybody, at the end of your life, your entire life will not be defined by your postcode or your genetic code. It'll be defined by decisions you make. And my dad made one decision, and every man especially needs to make some big decisions. In fact, one decision alone will change everything. And that's what drives the book. It's the story behind it. As you say, we seed it with everybody and everything that I could find that, really amplify that story. But that's what's behind it.
I think a great man that both you and I know said life is a decision. And any comment about that? I know you've referred to that, but I would argue that's the case. Life is not one decision, it's many decisions. And you've got to keep making the right ones, and you've got to make more right ones than more than wrong ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course it does, because life's a journey, right? And if our life is a journey that unfolds along a highway, there are all kinds of detours, there are all kinds of off ramps, there are all kinds of intersections, and at every point we need to make a decision which way we will keep going. And so I agree. And some big decisions are bigger than others, right? It really doesn't matter whether you had Vegemite or Marmite on your toast today, though I would argue Marmite is toxic. But some things we put on, on what we wear today, it's not such a big deal. But who we marry, the career paths we take, the big decisions, what we do, how we manage family, they're huge decisions, and they do affect where we end up.
100%. Just reading from the book here, page 121 of My Father's Son. One of the great voices to men in the 20th century was Edwin Louis Cole. He is famously quoted as saying, "Being a male is a matter of birth, being a man is a matter of choice. There is a real identity crisis in today's society regarding what it means to be a man. We need to embrace the challenge of redefining it in a proper, wholesome, and biblical way." What do you think? And you can tell us the rest of that chapter if you want to.
Well, in a world where people get cancelled, in a world where there's all kinds of pressures, and some of them are political, some of them are driven in the space of social media. There's all kinds of pressures on humanity, and especially on men. I actually don't think men are defined by what they wear, by their career. I don't think they're defined by, how big their muscles are, but by the state of their own soul, by the decisions they make that form the inner man, not the outer man. I know guys with huge muscles that really aren't great men. And I know some people that are small in stature and yet they're phenomenal, they're giants. And those things are formed and forged out of decisions they make, despite the pressures. I don't think that um, being macho definitely defines manhood. I don't think a whole lot of things. Our interests don't define manhood, but certainly I've got strong convictions on our biology being predetermined. I've got strong decisions on that. I'm not open to a discussion or debate on that. I'm not interested in that. And I know some decisions are coming from all different spaces. But there, it seems today that because of, again, some failings and some flaws of males, and let's admit it, in our past, some males have been bullies, they've been brutes, that there's been some things that they have done that are regrettable. But let's not put everybody into that same basket. We're not all abusers. We're not all people that put women down. All of that is wrong. It's so wrong, and that doesn't make you a man being a bully or being, you know, uh, someone who exerts their physical strength over anyone. That is not being a man. Uh, but sadly, some males have given manhood a really, really bad reputation, and hence you only have to add the fuel that is in social media. It seems to blow up and put things out of proportion. And and I just think we need to take back that space where males can show what it means to be ethical, to be kind, to be people of character, to be respected in the community, to be responsible and reliable within the home, to be husbands that can be trusted, to be dads that can set examples. I think we need to take that space back and not let the wrong commentary form the view of what males are, and especially what real men are. And I think if we can do that in an appropriate way, sometimes, it's not our words, it's our life. There's a guy who wrote in the Bible, his name is Paul, and he said this. He said, "You're a living letter known and read of all men." In other words, I think the message of our life is more lived than spoken. And I think the more we set examples by our lifestyle, the better.
100%. Now we're going to come back. The second last question I'll ask will be about the decision your dad made, because that's, to me, that's the crux of this whole deal here today. But on page 9, chapter 1, "Empty Chair" is the headline. It says here, "Many other men will say the same thing. The family without a father is sadly all too common today. Never in the history of our nation," that's Australia, "and I suspect the Western world, have there been more children growing up with a single parent, and most likely an absent father." Your comments about this incredible chapter here of this book.
Warwick, I talk to men not only now in our nation, but I've traveled extensively since that book was released a few weeks ago. It it is a story I hear over and over again. I was in One Nation recently. 70% of the households are fatherless. All right. So my question is not only do young men do, but what do young women do as far as the forming of their identity and their personhood when there's only one parent trying to actually help them navigate their future? I spoke to one young man in the writing of this book. I think he's actually in the pages there somewhere. And it was one of the more tender, if not emotional, conversations I had leading into this. And he's a young man that grew up. His biological dad left when he was quite young. Mum remarried. The second father just did not accept him. And he's trying to navigate, firstly, his early childhood and then puberty. And I remember him saying to me, he said, I just felt like an alien. I just didn't feel like I was like anybody else. Now, the reality is, more and more sadly, families are breaking down, and there are more and more children without, two biological parents in the home and all that. But it's sad because when someone's missing in that space, there's often something missing in their heart. The number of young men that we work with in our local church and beyond that are just feeling the effect of the void in their life because there was no dad around. And I don't think being able to play football or cricket is definitely the mark of a man, but there's some things that dads teach you. all right? There are some incredible mums, and I salute every single mum. I think they're heroes. Honestly, they're exceptional. You know, going through life, most of them have to work. Some of them working longer hours, still trying to manage the home, manage the budget, get their kids through schooling. Some of them are trying to maintain faith and commitment in the local church and community. They are champions, and they do their very
100%.
best. But the number of conversations I've had with men where dad was missing, sadly, some of them passed away when they were young, and that's tragic. Some of them, they were present in bodily form, but just not present with attention. I think one of the great challenges in life is dads, be there. Don't just be in the room. Put your phone down, turn all the white noise off, and listen with your eyes. Be there for your kids, all right? Let them tell you about their day and their challenges. But, you know, there's some practical things that it just seems like only dads teach you. You name the skill, you name the interest, you just name those moments of walking on beaches with your dad, learning to kick a footy, you know, those things. It's just when dad is missing, those things just don't seem to be there in their life. And honestly, the number of guys that have walked through that, they know that it's missing and it does affect their life.
Look, it does, and we're going to talk a bit more about it. I just want to tell you a story, and you can comment on this story. I was at a men's breakfast in Toowoomba, and you know, I'm like you, passionate for fathers, run Dads for Kids Fatherhood Foundation, and I shared the story of the importance of fathers. And this man came up to me at the end of this breakfast, and he said, you know, and he's in his 50s, probably 53, 54. He said, you know, Warwick, I was 10, 11 years of age, and I was playing football, and I was asking my dad all the time, please come and see me play football. Please come and play me football, because he was in a reasonable team in a competition. And finally, one Saturday, his father came to the football match, and he came to he could see him way up in the stands, and he was sat at the top of the stands there, and a friend came with him, and he looked up, and all his father did was talk to his friend. He didn't look at his son who was playing the football. And here he is now, what is it, 40, 45 years later, Wayne. He's telling me that story. And, you know, how many times have you heard a similar story, Wayne? And you just said something very important, by the way. There's the whole issue of absent fathers. South Africa, I think, is a country, 70% of those homes are fatherless. I think in America, it's close to 30 plus, between 30 and 40%. Here in Australia, it's around about the 20% mark, but it's serious. The Western world has got a problem with fatherlessness. But how many times have you heard that sort of story from men you've talked to? Because you've been passionate about men for a long, long time now.
I've been passionate about this probably, I guess, all my life and didn't realize it, but I realized it when my time leading the youth ministry in this country called Youth Alive. I really felt in my heart that I'd spent a long time helping teenagers, nearly 20 years. But there's a season that I'm now in that was really important to embrace, and that was to help fathers help them. And so it's been on my radar a long time. And you're right, Warwick. I talked to a guy on the side of a football field. I was watching one of my grandsons play footy just the other day, and one of the coaches of the teams came up. He had a copy of my book, and he was quite emotional. And he said, "I'm in this book. That's me, not personally, but his story, which is repeated over and over and over." And this guy is a coach of a team. And I said, "You do such a good job with these young boys." And he looked at me and said, "You know why I do that? Because I don't want them to go through what I went through. My dad didn't come to one game except for one in my life. He promised me he'd be there, and he got there for the last 5 minutes. And by the time I'd arrived, I'd already been benched." And you could hear the sorrow, right? And I just think, guys, we've got to do better. We've got to be there. I got a mate. I think he's in the book. If not, he'll be in a workbook we're going to produce for it. He's a retired copper now. He's awesome, right? And my oldest son was quite a successful cricketer, and he grew up with right through his early days into this club cricket, and then through higher levels of representative, right to like a sharp, pointy end. And my son was a spin bowler, and this other guy's son was a wicket keeper. And that's quite a relationship that they forge, on the field. And us two dads became great mates. And I remember turning up at a major rep game. It was midweek, so, very few of us can get there due to work commitments. And I remember seeing this guy, this father of the wicket keeper. And I remember saying to him, when I rocked up, the field was not far from one of my offices, and I went up and I sat beside him. I said, "You're here again." He says, "Mate, I try not to miss." He said, "I'm in charge of my life. I'm in charge of the roster." And he said, "I make sure when I know my boy's playing, I'm there." And this is what he said, Warwick. It never went away. This is close to 20 years ago. He said, "When my son replays the seasons of his life and he thinks about his childhood," he said, "I want my face in the crowd as much as possible in every scene." I thought, wow, this is a guy who works with kids. He's no doubt seen the other side of the ledger. Children are in trouble. Children have committed crimes, having to go to court, and all that's involved with that. And he realizes the need for not only the role, the job description, but the actual outworking of it, which ultimately all stems from just being present. Be there. And not only be there, be engaged. And, I thought, wow, because I think I say in the book somewhere, I don't remember ever in my early years, when I had black hair and was working as a youth worker, I don't remember ever going to court with a young guy or girl that had a good relationship with their dad. And I'm sure my mate, the policeman, knew that very well and was making sure that didn't happen in his family.
Yeah. Just a comment about this. Both you and I share a deep faith in God. We love the scriptures. And I notice at times you take the same approach as me, and you've just sort of said this just then, that if you're going to be a father, you've got to be there, right? Now, I can quote a whole bunch of scriptures and this and that. When I do a fatherhood seminar, I don't talk a lot about scriptures, not because I don't believe in them. It's because I want men to turn up for their kids, to turn up for their wife. And so I don't over spiritualize it in a sense, because to me, being a father is intensely practical. Your comment?
Oh, it is intensely practical. I love the role of the Bible in our life. Got up this morning, had a coffee so that I was human, opened my Bible. I believe in it. It's the foundation for my life. Jesus, he said in the Gospels, he said, you can choose how you build a house. You can build it on sand that has no substance, or you can build it on rock. And you won't tell the difference between those two houses until the storms come. And for me, the reason my family, we've built a life based on God's word is because I actually want it on something that's solid. We can build it on modern philosophies. They'll change within 5 years. All right. You can build your life based on something you read somewhere, and yeah, that's okay. And it might feel good for a while, but what's going to happen when the storms of life come? So I really do believe in the Bible. I don't believe in the Bible being used as a hammer. I believe in the Bible as being something that actually just gives us firm foundations, can turn lights on so we can see our way forward through situations. And I think the more we use the Bible as literally a letter written from God, who ultimately invites us to call him a father himself, wow, that changes the view of everything.
And I 100% agree with you. My problem has been, as someone who's been involved in church life for 54, 55 years, I've seen a lot of guys carry a Bible to church. They even raise their hands, they sing the songs, but they go home and they treat their wife like, proverbial. They treat their kids like dirt. And what I've realized is it's not about how many songs you sing or if you carry the Bible well or whatever it is, or how many times you go to church, but you have to be there in a practical way. And again, you're advocating this in this incredible book, My Father's Son. I was going to say My Father's Son, but it's so true. It's so beautiful. But your comment about the important reality for us as people of faith or not of faith to embrace this practicality of being there. I know it's simple, but I'd say 3/4 of my whole message is just be there with your kids, be there with your wife.
Oh, I agree. And men that are one thing on a Sunday and a very, very different person on Monday really have to come back to the basics of what it really means to be authentic as a follower of Christ. Um, there's no way you can justify that. It's not the way it's ever meant to be. I think being people that are real, and people that are genuine in our faith means it doesn't look any different in any context. And so that's probably a conversation for another day. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, we're repeating something that really is important. And if men that are a part of this podcast today want to be men that see their children also take up the Christian faith, they need to live it in a way that says to the generation following them. The guy called Paul, Apostle Paul, he said, imitate me. Or I think the NIV version says, follow my example, because I'm following the example of Christ. I guess the question for all of us as men is have a look at the guy in the mirror and ask the question, am I living a life that's followable? Am I living a life that actually what I am, not what I say, but what I am is something that I want to see repeated in the generations that follow me? That's a big question, to be honest with the guy in the mirror and to own your stuff, and dare I say it, some of us need to apologize. Some of us haven't lived an authentic faith. Some of us have had a Sunday faith. Some of us have had a what I call a jailhouse faith. It's what we need when we're in trouble, but the rest of the time we don't live it out. I think we need to actually start saying, hey, listen, you know what? I actually want to wind it back and start from a fresh foundation that's real, that's genuine, and that is following the example of the one that is the author of our faith.
100%, 100%. Edwin Louis Cole, you talked about him in this book, and I think both of us share that deep love for him. I still think he's probably one of the greatest men's movement leaders in the world.
Yep.
And certainly his book on Maximize Manhood, I've got it on my shelf behind me. I pick it up today, and it reads like it was written yesterday, correct?
Yeah, timeless. Timeless. I remember somebody back. Remember when we used to have tapes? I got a couple of tapes.
I'm
given
old
to
enough
me.
for that, brother. I'm old enough for that.
I listened to a couple of Ed's messages when I was a young man, and I'm like, wow. I think those teachings got so into my heart, and been somewhat of a benchmark for me, even in the way I think as a dad and now as a granddad.
Yeah, he said something. Your comment on this quote, and I'm sure you know it. Edwin Louis Cole said, manhood and Christ-likeness are synonymous. Manhood and Christ-likeness are synonymous. Now, we just talked a bit about that, but any further comment about that incredible, beautiful Coleism, they call it?
Perfect. I agree. I think the people that think being a Christian is for the weak, they've just never taken time to really look into who Jesus was and how he lived. The courage, the kindness, his ability to give dignity to people at every strata of society, his wisdom, his ability to stand in the face of just incredible opposition and not waver from principles that he knew was true. I mean, seriously, I don't know another life that is so flawless that I can copy. So Ed's right, absolutely, without a shadow of doubt. Manhood and Christ-likeness is it's hand in glove.
Hand in glove, yeah. Now, you mentioned this decision your father made, and it's actually in this first section of this book, and he came to the conclusion. It says here in the prologue that you've written, and your dad speaking, he did remember one thing that his dad had once said: the worst thing a man can be is a liar, a drunkard, and a thief. And Alex thought to himself, well, my whole life is made up of these things. The three things his father had told him he shouldn't be. Not one person in entire town cares if I live or die, he concluded. So what actually happened to your dad? Tell us the story, because it changed him and it changed you, and really is the sort of the subplot of this incredible book.
Subplot, that's well put. Yeah, my dad, Alex Alcorn, as I said, we said goodbye to him in October of 2021, and his funeral was one of the toughest days of my life, to be honest, because he was a hero not only to me, but he was a dad and a granddad to countless numbers of men and women across this country. But his life that we celebrated there on that occasion, at the end of his life, was very different to the way it started. I hinted at how it started with dysfunction in his family. By the time he was 24, he was a mess. He was in trouble with the law. He'd done some things which were really regrettable, chronic alcoholic. And there was a Sunday that he'd been arrested yet again for drunken disorderly behavior over the weekend. He was in a jail cell. It's a Sunday morning. He wakes up, he's been arrested, and he has just a moment of reflection. He's lying in a dirty cell in Dalby, just near where you were talking about Toowoomba, Darling Downs of Queensland. And he has this moment where he realizes that no one cares about him. No one cares if he lives or dies. And he decided the best thing to do was to take his life. So he'd been living rough, and he had a couple of mates that, had guns. And he went to one particular house and he said to his friend, "Can I borrow your gun?" with one intent, and that was to take his life. And his friend had loaned the gun to a cousin to go on a hunting trip. So, well, what else will I do? It's now late in the afternoon, early evening, Sunday. So he went down to the main street to do what he'd often done with his mates, and that is heckle a bunch of Christians that were having a meeting in the main street. Back in the old days, we used to call them open-air meetings. And on the back of an old ute, man would get up and share his story, followed by another one, and then the preacher would get up, a couple of songs in between with this little motley choir, shall we call it, of 5 or 6 people. At the end of a man sharing a story, and his own story, reflecting on the claims of Christ, that who he sets free is free indeed, the singers got up and they began to sing a song that says, come home, all who are weary, come home." Now, in that occasion, my dad wasn't wearing shoes, he wasn't wearing a shirt, and he had his teeth all taken out. So he was a mess of a human being. Can you imagine, 24, he was 24, looked 64. And so he walks out of the crowd, and his mates think, here's Alex, he's going to pick another fight. That's what they expected. They thought, here he goes again, he's going to get up to something bad. And he literally staggered forward. And he went and he knelt down in the gutter in the main street of Dalby. And a man comes over to him, puts his hand on his shoulder, says, "Son, would you like to pray the sinner's prayer?" And my dad apparently used colourful language and told him he didn't know what the sinner's prayer was. But he said, "I'm going to talk to God." And his simple prayer was, "God, if you're real, you need to show me. And one of the ways you can show me is you can help me stand up, because I don't even think I can get up from here. But if you're real and you show me how real you are, I'll give you my life and I'll follow you the rest of my life." And he did so for the next 70 years of his life. He went to a Bible college just a few months later. He didn't know much, honestly. He didn't experience what some of us had growing up in a Christian home. But they guided him through 3 years of college. He met my mum there. And, and for the rest of his life, he just gave his life to serving others. And so, on that occasion, we said goodbye to a 94-year-old legend, a patriarch in our part of the world. And I'll never forget my niece. She's quite an orator. She walked up with all the other grandkids, including my 2 sons. And she stood, and there was a huge photo in one of our campuses on the big LED screen. And she looked back at him, and she just shook her head and she said, "I wonder what the people that saw my granddad staggering without shoes and a shirt through the town of Dalby 70 years ago would think of this credit." Warwick, it's the largest funeral I've been in. It was huge, right? In person and online. When you get to your 90s, usually there's not many people left to come to your funeral, but this thing was packed.
Yeah.
It was packed. And she looked and she said, "I wonder what the people that saw my granddad 70 years ago would think of this crowd and do in response to the tributes that we're giving to this legend patriarch." And then she looked at everyone and she said, "The only difference between that drunk and this patriarch was Jesus." And she walked off. I was like, that was the best preaching I've heard in a long time. Because one decision changed Alex Alcorn's life, and it changed our family line forever. I never grew up in a home where alcohol dominated. I never grew up in a home where there was domestic violence. I only ever knew parents that were kind and supportive and encouraging. And that's been passed on to my kids and their kids. I say often, a lot of us, we complain about our family tree, and maybe the best thing we can do is plant a new one in the greatest soil of all, the richest soil, which is the love of God. And I can tell you that's what my dad did. It changed him, and it changed the lines that followed him for generations. One decision. Now, there were many, and he still carried some of the scars, Warwick. He was not a perfect man. There was, even in his 90s, he still wanted to tell me some of the stories, and he was still wrestling with some of the pain that came from his childhood. I'm not one of those guys that says, if you just say yes to Jesus, everything's going to go away. No, some of those things stay with us, but he gives us the strength to navigate life despite them. And that was my dad's story. And, it's quite an honor to be able to write and celebrate him. And I get emotional, mate, because he had a profound effect upon me, upon my kids. It's amazing. And I just want to say that there's broken men and there's hurting families that are listening to this today. Don't give up. Just reach up. Reach up to a God that loves you. He will help you. Because I can tell you it changed everything for us. And it will for you. And if you get that book, or if you've got a friend, they'll take you to what that man said to my dad in the gutter. There's a thing called the sinner's prayer. It simply says, God, I'm a broken human being and I can't do life without you. Come into my life and change me from the inside out. He answers those kinds of prayers. He did for my dad. He did for me. And he'll do it for you. And that's my encouragement. That's our story, and it changes everything.
It changes everything. And if you want to read about this incredible story of Wayne's dad and the effect of that one decision, which basically changed history, not just for him and his family, but for you and for your children and now your grandchildren, correct?
Yep. Correct. And my sister and
Incredible
her
story.
kids. It's a story of phenomenal redemption. You'd never, if you saw my dad, in his 20s, in his early 20s, you would never have imagined the blessed family and the generations that follow him. You could never have imagined that it would happen, because it's not natural. It's actually supernatural.
Supernatural. As we finish today, Wayne, what are your 3 top tips to be a great dad? 3 top tips.
Oh, can I add 4th? Let me start. Buy that book.
Go for 4. Up to you.
No, it's at Coorong. They've been fantastic. They've driven the whole project, and I'm grateful for them. So you can get it at Coorong. A number of pastors are telling me they're actually going to buy a whole quantity and give them to all their men in their church on Father's Day, which I think is a pretty cool idea. And any women you can. But look, there's a lot of great tips that are in there. But what would I say to a dad? Number 1, be there. Just be there. You might wonder, I haven't got a lot to offer. These next generation, they're so much smarter than me. They got better technology. Just be there. They don't need you to be smarter than them. They just need you to be there. Number 2, be a good listener. Listen with your eyes. Don't just be in the room. Be present when you're there. And thirdly, be genuine. Be the real deal. Be copyable. All right? They don't necessarily need to follow your career path. It's not about that. But it's about having a character and a lifestyle that is authentic. That listen, they won't thank you when they're 15, for your example, but they probably will when they're 35. All right? But just be real. Be accessible as much as within you. Love their mum. Just be a good husband. Be a good man. And if you're struggling with that, just ask God to help you, because he answers prayers like that.
It's incredible, my dear brother. Thank you for talking to us today. And for those who are listening today, I certainly encourage you to get hold of My Father's Son by Wayne Alcorn. It only came out literally a few months back, so it's really flying off the shelves. Get it at Coorong Books, and I think you can get it at Amazon as well. But certainly Coorong Books have got loads of copies. I bought I think ended up buying over a dozen copies and gave them to my board members, So we just
cool.
appreciate you, Wayne. We thank you for your input for men and your championing of men across Australia. and encouraging men. And again, thank you for talking to us today.
Mate, absolute pleasure. God bless. And if anything we can do to help you or the men and women listening, we're just starting to build a website around this project called waynealcorn.com. The book's on there, and we're starting to build blogs and other conversations that are also around this. We just want to see families flourish. So thanks for all you're doing too, Warwick.
Thank you so much.